purpose of this teaching is really to give tools to people for coaching. And perhaps some of you will have 2 or 3 people that you'd like that want to meet with you and so forth. To me, I feel like the most important priority we have is, and the privilege we have, is to grow the leadership habits of Jesus in people. And that's what training leadership is, taking Jesus' example, how he led in all kinds of situations, and then imparting that knowledge and experience into people so that they can lead like Jesus. From a vision point of view, I am absolutely convinced that the most important thing we're going to do this year is grow our leadership and grow others' leadership. Because you don't grow a big church, you grow big people, and the church takes care of itself. When you have big growth without big on the outside, without it on the inside, you're getting set up for a collapse. And thank God sometimes he doesn't grow our ministry beyond our character. So we can go deep this year. God can do great things, like I said in our 501. If we raise up 40 leaders, I know we'll reach another 400 people for Christ. It's just the way it works, you know. And so this is just a tool to take, and we'll put it on there, and people then can watch this. This is the first of about 50 conversations I felt like that connect with this material on. If I was going to raise up someone to take my place as a pastor, what conversations would I want to have with them? What are the most important things you got to know about leadership? And this is one. Just from a standpoint of the mentoring point of view, we're trying to figure out how to put people with whoever. But the idea is that you would meet with them over a period of hopefully at least 6 times in the next 3 months. And basically unpacking the material from 501, and each time we do another seminar, then the next 3 months, you know, breaking it down, the word becoming flesh, practically, how does this apply to me, and helping people to make it apply to them. And this relationship is I call it accountability. I like this verse, Proverbs 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron. And I almost call these accountability groups just iron men and women groups, iron sharpening, you know. And the picture of that, I said on 501 that a mentor is a shoulder to lean on, a brain to pick, and a kick in the pants sometimes. And the idea of this from the very beginning is if someone's in a group, you're saying, I am willing to not only just come and be encouraged, but I'm willing for you to challenge me. And that's what I'm hoping is something we don't have a whole lot in our coaching in a general Bible study or something. But it's like iron sharpens iron. I like that picture because it's not like iron. You know, God's not telling you, go to war with somebody. He's saying, come alongside. But as you do, it's okay if the rough edges get exposed. And give each other the permission to say, whoa, what was that? and to really go deeper in getting all of our lives more sharper for the Lord and stuff. And so I'm telling the people, if you're going to be a coach person, you give them permission to really coach you. And John Wimber used to say, you know, I'll know if I'm your pastor the first time I tell you no or stop it. If I say stop it and you get offended and leave the church, I know I was never really your pastor in the first place. And so there has to be that point in these relationships where you go a little bit deeper under the surface. In these meeting times, the first part will be, I call it get real, because I'm going to say these are the 4 key things you learn to be a leader. R stands for relationship, E stands for equipping, A stands for your attitude, and L stands for leadership. So you're going to ask, what happened this week or last week that, you know, you had a question? How did you do in your relationships this week? You know, what was God teaching you? So there'll be kind of that. It'll be a very interactive kind of thing. I really emphasized in 501, if you really are going to be mentored, you need to ask questions. You don't need to just be the one there sitting passively. The more you get ready for the meeting, the better. And so that's part of why you'll see this particular lesson is very oriented on them doing some homework and getting ready. I quote mentored a guy for 10 years. He was much worse after 10 years than when I started. But what the mentoring was, he liked me taking him out to eat and sitting there, and he never did a thing with it. And that was my first attempt at mentoring. So I'm hoping this time around gets a little better. I spent a lot of money on free lunches, but anyhow.
10 years.
Probably at least, would you say 10 years? Anyhow.
Oh, it's a lifetime.
I'm a very patient person, just not very smart, but patient. So this first lesson, if I was going to tell somebody, are you serious about being a leader? I would start with this, and that is developing a personal growth plan. Every leader wants to grow, but few have a plan to grow. And I think a turning point in my life was in 1987, first time I heard John Maxwell speak. And he asked a question, and it was this. Tell us your plan to grow. Tell us what you're going to do this year so that next year you're a better leader. Now, that seems so obvious, but it was a new thought to me, even though I'd been a pastor for a number of years. I would say up until that time, all of my growth had been accidental growth. I had sort of an osmosis kind of idea that if you just kind of go to church and you soak, that you're going to just sort of grow and change. And it never occurred to me, no, growth really should be an intentional thing. Yeah, you'll grow a certain amount by coming to church, but many people go to church for 20 years and don't really grow. And many people think that once they become a leader, okay, I'm arrived. Now I'm the leader. No. And so they don't grow anymore. And I have found, and I'll just say this, growth is the great separator. You watch people that were on the same track, and then one decides to be disciplined in their personal growth and the other just decides to coast. That person who's intentional, you watch them 5-10 years later and they're way up here and those people are way down here, you know. And I'm not bragging at all, but most of the leaders I started with, AIPAC and the Jesus movement, most of them, we were all the same. Some of them made better grades than me, had more talent than me. But over the years, I saw a twist. I decided I went all into this growth, and they just kind of coasted, and it's not even close to the impact their lives are having today. And so here's the key thing. God's biggest plan for us is not to think about growing a church, but to think about growing ourselves. And then to think about those few people that we can invest in who want to grow. And I just challenge everyone to find your 3, find your 12, and find your 70. Your 3 are who the inner circle that you're supposed to do your ministry with. And then who's sort of the 12 that are kind of people you're, and then who is the bigger influence, like the 70 I would refer to as the youth group or the Ascend, you know. And you want to train all of those. But Jesus had a strategic plan. One of the things I remember saying, Jesus, I want to be like you. Then he said, well, go read what I did. I spent most of my time making disciples of a few leaders. And so that's why this is so important to me. So here's some principles. Number 1, and I'm going to fix up this outline and send it out to the people who get it so it'll look better when they get it. But anyhow, growth is not automatic. Only stagnation is. Growth is supposed to be intentional. Look at Hebrews 5:12 says, by this time you ought to be teachers, but you need someone to teach you elementary truths. In other words, they didn't grow. They stayed students. Philippians 2:12, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Secondly, it's going to take a plan that includes setting time apart for growth. 1 Timothy 4 says, take time to keep yourself spiritually fit. He refers to it as an athlete training. And anybody here who's ever been in any kind of sports, no, you don't just go and play the game, right? And we've got some people getting trained right now athletically here. I know, I can tell. But there's a time you go to the gym, isn't it? It's not like, boy, I sure hope that I get in shape, you know. It's costly. And so you just got to tell people, you know, I remember hearing early on in my thing, this leader said, if you would dedicate an hour a day to any subject in 5 years, you'll be an expert. But would you be willing to choose something that you would spend an hour on a day every day for 5 years to become the very best that you can be. So unless you're literally willing to prioritize and say, this is my personal growth time, because I know this is the most important thing I do, because if I don't grow, the people don't grow, the ministry doesn't grow. And so when is that going to be? Growth always involves healing and breaking through growth barriers. There's no growth without healing, and there's no lasting healing without growth. And I think we've seen both of that. We've seen people who grow, but they don't really deal with their issues. And even though they get a lot of head knowledge and skills, their personal life is a mess. But then you see other people who get a great healing, and it doesn't last. And that's the most dangerous thing, I think, is when someone gets a healing zapped of the Holy Spirit, but they don't grow, and they go back to their vomit or whatever. They just actually sometimes end up worse. And so this is huge. Every branch bears fruit, he what? Prunes. Confess your faults to one another and pray for another that you may be healed. Growing people let God and other people into places that need to be healed in their life. This is such a simple principle, but isn't it true? People say, I want to get healed. And then you ask them, will you let someone into that secret closet besides Jesus?
Right.
That's usually kind of where the rubber meets the road. No, don't come near. Don't trespassing. And will you let somebody in and confess that? And will that become an open book? Or will that just become, covered over by something else? And so that's why I say a core value of Heart for the World is we lead with vulnerability. That's just how we do it. And so a big part of these coaching times are going to be that. I didn't know that I had that hot button in me, and man, did it come out last week. Because those are lids. If you don't get healed, you go. So as soon as you start growing, all kinds of weird things start surfacing in your life. And that's good, if you're willing to take those lids off. Growth is magnified by mentoring and coaching. It's not just personal and private. So all through the Bible, the New Testament says, boy, there's coaching things needs to be in the church. Let the older women teach the younger women how to keep their home. It's never meant to just be a sermon in a Bible study. It's the things that I've taught, you've seen and heard and learned from my life, pass on to some other one who can teach someone else. So we're going to have to get close enough so people can see, maybe better than a sermon is let them cook dinner with you, or let them, go on a mission trip with you, because it's what they see and hear. That's where the stuff surfaces. That's so important. Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. The way is slow if you go alone, fast, and more effective if you go with others who've already gone before you. Growth involves both grace and knowledge. I love that verse in 1 Peter 2 that says, grow in the grace and the knowledge. So there's the knowledge side of it, and then there's the grace. And grace is mostly received through people encouraging you, loving you, helping you. And God's growth plan for each of us is unique. God develops us along a path that involves the seasons of our life, our unique shape, and the opportunities and circumstances He sets before us. Growth happens as we're aware of the race He's called us to run and the adjustment we need to make in the circumstances that are before us. So in other words, one growth plan doesn't fit all. And that's why the personalization of this is so important. Because where you're at in your life, if you're a young mother, and where I'm at, is so different. And so we need to help people find that individual, unique growth plan. Though we'll have the same classes, that's what we do with the seminars. We need to designate a path for them that really fits who they are, where they are. So for example, later on, I'm going to ask you the question, how do you learn? And some people give up on a growth plan because they don't learn like a student learns. They were not the best reader in their class. So they say, well, but some of the greatest leaders are not necessarily academic people. And yet, unfortunately, in seminaries and others, oftentimes your opportunity to be thought of as a pastor depends on your academic ability, which it's great if you're good at academics, but it doesn't limit you. Maybe you learn by your hands. You learn by your conversation. You learn by, the more sharing of your heart and the journey, picking up things from everyday life. So we want to make sure that the growth plan fits the person. Growth involves a specific rhythm of life that's unique to each of us. When Jesus says, I'm going to put my yoke on you, he's speaking of mentoring or coaching. I'm going to coach you, and he says, the yoke that I put on you will be easy because it will fit you. And so, for one person, I could easily say, you should read 52 books a year. That's what Chris was saying he's trying to do, read 52 books. I said, well, that's great. Some of you would say, well, I'll never be a leader if I have to read 52 books a year. That's not it. But some of you could listen to 5 audio books in the next 3 months or whatever it is. So that's just giving you the suggestion of how we want to personalize this. So the plan for this first conversation is to ask you to answer what I think are the key questions in developing your own personal growth plan. So what I would like you to do is, before you get together with your coach, is to try to answer these questions the best you can. A coach will then be able to take your answers and begin to say, all right, let's turn this into a plan. Now I know what we're going to talk most about, because we know right now your big challenge point is your teenager. Okay, look, I bet you God's teaching you more about leadership through teenagers than anything else. I wasn't looking at you. But for someone else, it's school. That's your crucible is what they call it. What is that place where you're getting the potter's wheel of your life is for someone else, it's finances, or it's being a newlywed, or it's being a single adult, whatever it is. And so we really want to be able to take that and then say, okay, based on this, here is how you and I will talk through what we should do for the next 6 months when we talk. That's going to help you get from here to there. So the first set of questions reflect an awareness of what God is doing and speaking and forming in your life. I believe the Holy Spirit is the coach. We are the facilitators. So, Jesus said, I only do what the Father's doing. So we want to see, what is the Father doing in your life? And we want to, tag team with the Father. That's obviously the goal of coaches. So as you reflect on the past weeks and months, what are some of the main things you feel like the Lord's been speaking to you, dealing with you about, telling you to take a closer look in your own heart? This is probably the question that requires the deepest reflection in your life. It's such an advantage in growth if you journal, but even if you can't journal a lot, at least if you can jot a few things, because if you can just come up with what was one thing each week that was big in my life, and you can go back and reference that gives you a great foundation, especially for conversation. So the reflection is always going to be a big part of mentoring. Them reflecting on what God's doing, reflecting on what they're learning. And so as you've done that, what are some things? I've got my growth plan, but I can show people, but I don't know if I even want to, because if a growth plan after 40 years is very different than a growth plan if this was your first year of trying to do it. So I don't want to make it sound like, I could never have a growth plan. I'd die if I was on that growth plan. Well, yours doesn't have anything like mine. But for example, God's been speaking to me about things as it related to how to go from being an enabler to an empowerer. And Sharon's reading a book, and I looked at it, and I'll read it when she's done, but it has a whole lot about things like saying the last 10% in conversations, how to not accidentally diminish people you're leading by being, You know, I shared at the 501 that I realized in my leadership style, sometimes I intimidate or overly impress people. So they just get quiet and listen to me because, you know, they either think, you know, wow, you're too strong, or what do I have to add to this conversation? Or, you know, versus if I can change my role to be a better question asker and a better listener, then that helps them to grow. So that's just a personal example of something God's been speaking to me. You know, he's been speaking to me about how this next 20 years is about multiplying the ministry, being a spiritual grandparent. Grandparenting is a spiritual season in our life in every way. It's, you know, it's probably not Shane's season right now, but it's my season. So I have a whole set of mentoring that I need that's different than him, is what I'm trying to say. He's telling me simple things. Take deliberate time to have fun and rest better. Obviously, health is a huge part. And there was a prophetic word, and I got it confirmed at the Sunday. Someone gave me this prophetic word because I was saying about a young man who went and talked to a lady who came in who was on a walker. And then they came and said, you know what the Lord showed me about you? It's not an accident that your name is Walker, because you were on a walker and now you're a jogger, and your calling is not just that you can teach people things, but you have an anointing to heal, and that people are broken. You're going to be walking alongside of them, and it's going to be both healing and training. I thought, well, I'll take that as a word. So those are just some of the examples of words that I could share more, but especially if you've had a word in the last recent times, but just to describe what are the things stirring in your life and what has God been speaking to you? What have people confirmed about your gifting or prophetically encouraged you in? Who around you are in history? Now this begins to come to the next level of your shape. And again, if you've already been through the shape interview, then this is really a simple part. And so people that you're coaching who haven't been to 301 in shape, we want to make sure they make that a top priority, because so much of the coaching then comes back to your specific shape. What is your sweet spot? What is the thing that you're supposed to focus on? Now, though we're all to minimize our weaknesses, when it comes to coaching, we should spend the most amount of time on maximizing our strengths. For example, if you're coaching me, you probably won't spend a lot of time talking to me about my worship leading, because that's not really my shape, you know. And so yet, if people know that, then you're always, as you coach them, you're bringing them back to, okay, let's come back to your shape almost every time. Because that, you know, remember the whole Proverbs 24 verse, train up a child in the way they should go. In other words, in the way that they've been shaped to function best. And so what are those gifts? Again, always back to your passion. Where does your passion and gifts meet? How are you improving there? See, I want to know. I mean, I want you all to improve in everything. But boy, if you're a worship leader, make it number one, you know. Come on, you know, great. I'll be glad if you learn how to ski this year. But I would rather you keep growing in that big area. Asking the question, who in history is doing what you dream of doing? And that's a huge thing, you know. Can you give me an example of role models or people that either now alive or even in books, and you think that's what you're supposed to be like? And I always tell people, make sure you read the biographies of people who are the closest to what you think you're supposed to be like someday. And because why? You'll not have to learn all the lessons they learned. You can borrow from their experience, you know. So that's why I've read every one of those, you know, whether it's Billy Graham, D.L. Moody, Reinhard Bonnke, you know, anyone who preached to the nations, because now I can imagine myself in that journey and I can grow to that. So that'll be a part of your growth journey in that way. What are the hurtful experiences of your past that God's redeeming? And then take a minute and just write this. I just love to do this when I mentor people. What is the picture of the future you that you know God's telling you to pursue? Just describe that future you. I want you to see yourself 10 years from now. For some of us, it's 5 years from now because we're not too sure about the 10, but 5 years from now, whatever it is. But what is that future person? What is that future person? Because the more you see her or him, again, that helps create straight lines for your mentoring. And that's huge. What are some significant things about the season of life you're in? What are your present obligations and priorities to be faithful in? As we coach you, that's very important. Be faithful in what is present, What kind of a learner are you? What's the best way for you to learn? Are you a visual? Are you auditory? What is your learning style? And I love this question. What is the growth activators? What charges you up to grow? And again, it's different things. Some people, it's like, man, let me go. Man, when I go out evangelizing, I just like it's drinking power, energy, or when I'm with kids, or, those are huge things to think about. Then when it comes to goals or key practices, what are the things the Holy Spirit is wanting you to focus on and getting better at? So you should pray about that. How about in these following categories? I believe the Lord is especially wanting me to focus on getting better, first of all, as a worshiper in my relationship with Jesus. What are those issues? Where are the issues of the attitudes the Lord wants you to get better on? In relationships with your family, your church, your friends. In habits that need to break, change, or where you need to grow in skills that would help you be more effective. And then the final section is just questions for application. What are ways and plans for you to do things that you'd like to maybe think about putting on the calendar that will help you to grow the most this year? So for example, number 1 would be, what is the time you will set for your personal growth? And so for me, it's 5 o'clock in the morning. That may not be the best one for you, all right? But it's the only time that works for me, because if I try to do it at 9 at night, I'm asleep. I'll fall asleep doing it. But whatever that time it is. Now, multiply how that is. So let's just say, you're going to have an hour personal growth time well, it could be 30 minutes of it could be, on the treadmill or the elliptical, listening to a podcast, or it could be, while you're practicing for worship and, whatever it is. But it might not all be in the same hour. For me, some people tell me they think an hour is a lot. For me, it's not even enough. I can barely, get through what I'm reading in an hour, much less that. But just having that clearly defined is one of the most important things about our first meeting in mentoring. One of the things that I've had to do is actually limit my time, because I want to read the Bible longer than I have time to read it. And so then I don't do enough of the other disciplines I need to do. So I have to plan that time out. Who are my mentors? Who should I learn from, and who should learn from me? And what should I learn from them? And so mentors obviously are people here that coach you, but they are also there's certain people God wants you to learn from. And and it changes for me. Like right now, I'm listening a lot to Chris Hodges, this Church of the Highlands in Mobile, Alabama. It seems like every time I listen to him, it's sparking this ideas. I don't know why, but God's anointed him to speak into my life right now. There was a time Steve Furtick was big, others, but you end up with these voices. And I have these writers. There's certain people, I read every book they write, and you kind of just figure out your book list, your listening list, and then who are the people that you should learn from. And I tell you, don't limit it to your mentors. It's just huge. Like you wouldn't believe how much people enjoy it if you were really hungry to learn. So if you saw someone that was a successful businessman and you feel like you have a desire to be better at entrepreneur, and you said, could I come and talk and ask you questions? They would love that. And you might just do that too. You see someone has a great marriage or has a great style parenting, and just whatever it is, that you begin to make a list of people I want to learn from. I went down to El Paso, spent an afternoon with Eddie Lee, the pastor of Harvest Church, because he's 76, and he's been doing this for 55 years, and he knows that. And I just asked him every question I could ask him, and he loved it. He didn't even want me to leave, you know. And I learned a lot from him. That's a key to this thing. And so, what then, as you look at the next 3 months, what things would you like to put in your growth plan, and your coach can help you nail that down. And then who will be key people? And we talked about this 5-1. Who will be Timothy's, Barnabas's, and Paul's? Meaning, Timothy is someone else you're bringing along. Barnabas is your good friend that encourages you. Every one of you needs someone who just makes you feel great about yourself. Because you got plenty of people who will point out your faults. But who's your Barnabas? And they'll help you grow in a tremendous way, because they'll tell you there's hope for you, you know. And then who is your Pauls? Who are the people that are just ahead of you that you're going to try to learn from, and make a list of that. So there you go. That's the lesson for the first conversation. What is your growth plan? Amen.